This season of Advent, let us pause to reframe the story of Christ's birth in a way that compels us to bend a knee to His Lordship in every part of our lives. Born the King.
Have you ever gotten writer's block? You know you want to write something, but you just can't think of what to say. Even if you know what you're supposed to write about, even if you know your topic well, sometimes the words just don't come. The feeling can be crippling, especially if you're coming up on a deadline. I know the feeling well. In fact, as I was writing the script for this very video, I struggled to come up with the right thing to say, and it stalled the process. I procrastinated and put it off to avoid the feeling of writer's block, so much so that I fell behind and allowed myself to get stressed about whether or not I'd get the video done in time or at all. My paralysis and worrying about what to say only led to further worry and fear, and ultimately something worse than my original struggle with writing. Sometimes we allow small things to determine our decisions and the course of events in our lives. But it turns out the small things we were worried about aren't nearly as bad as the bigger things that happen because we didn't deal with those smaller things in the first place. I could have saved myself a lot of stress and anxiety if I would have just dealt with the writer's block in the moment, instead of pushing off and procrastinating. Ahaz found himself in a similar, if much more significant situation in our passage this week. Ahaz was king of the southern kingdom of Judah, and Judah was threatened by an alliance between Syria and Israel, who were planning to invade Jerusalem and replace Ahaz with their own king. Ahaz greatly feared this alliance, but God had told Ahaz through Isaiah the prophet that their efforts against Judah wouldn't succeed, and that in fact both those nations would fall within Ahaz's lifetime. God told Ahaz to stop worrying and not to be afraid, and to trust that God would protect Judah. So we pick up the story in Isaiah 7:10-16. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, "Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test." Then Isaiah said, "Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore the Lord Himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on the house of your father a time unlike any since Ephraim broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria." Those final words must have echoed in Ahaz's ears. He will bring the king of Assyria. See, behind the scenes, Ahaz had been making a deal with Assyria to protect Judah from Syria and Israel. And in this moment, God tells Ahaz that the very thing he had turned to for security would be his and his nation's undoing. Now, Assyria wasn't just some small-time, ragtag group of scrappy fighters. Assyria was the big kid on the block. Assyria was the empire. No one had stopped them from doing or taking whatever they wanted. So the idea of Assyria coming after you would have struck fear in the heart of anyone who heard about it. In fact, that's why Syria and Israel wanted to take over Judah in the first place, to create a bigger alliance to fight Assyria. They were too big to fight alone. And that's why Ahaz went to Assyria for help. He knew that they could deal with his enemies, Syria and Israel. And technically they did. Isaiah's prediction that Syria and Israel would fall within Ahaz's lifetime, in fact, came true. But in a twist of irony, what Ahaz didn't see was that Assyria didn't need motivation to attack his enemies, nor did they need Ahaz's permission to take over his country. So, into this geopolitical mess comes Isaiah, the messenger of God. Isaiah finds Ahaz paralyzed by fear and caught up in a seemingly hopeless situation. Led by God, he tells Ahaz that God can deal with all of Judah's enemies and that he shouldn't worry about Syria and Israel because their time is coming. But Isaiah tells Ahaz in verse 9, "Unless your faith is firm, I cannot make you stand firm." Faith is what God required. Faith that God could do what he said and take care of Judah's enemies. Faith that God would do what he promised. And to show that God is worthy of Ahaz's faith, God offers to show Ahaz a sign. In verse 11, he challenges Ahaz, "Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights." Which is to say, ask anything and I'll do it. There's no limit on what Ahaz can ask of God in this moment. But while it may seem like a test of God's faithfulness, it's really a test of Ahaz's faith. To a casual onlooker, it would seem that Ahaz's answer is a good one. "I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test." It would seem that Ahaz is appealing to his own piety in refusing to test God. We may even be reminded of Jesus' response to the tempter in the wilderness. But in reality, Ahaz doesn't want to put his own faith to the test because he's already made up his mind to trust Assyria instead of God. No amount of evidence of God's power, faithfulness, or trustworthiness would change his mind. John Oswalt sums it up like this: "So it always is. Evidence cannot create faith. It can only confirm it. Where there is not faith, evidence is merely unwelcome, something which needs to be explained away." So Isaiah responds, "Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also?" There's a lot in this statement. Isaiah contrasts the great faith of David with Ahaz's lack of faith. How the mighty house of David has fallen. Isaiah calls Ahaz out for his scheming and makes it clear he's trying the patience of both his own people and the Assyrian king, not to mention Isaiah. And notice when Isaiah mentions "my God," it implies that Ahaz's God has become another. See, the decision to appeal to Assyria had spiritual implications as well as political ones, for Assyria's help could only be procured through a covenant with her. Such a covenant would involve the recognition of the Assyrian gods and admission of their lordship. Ahaz had not simply declined God's help, he had made a covenant with another god and allowed idolatry to infect himself and his nation. Isaiah lays out the consequence of Ahaz's lack of faith in God. "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on the house of your father a time unlike any since Ephraim broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria. The once mighty kingdom of David will fall through the Assyrians." The very ones in whom Ahaz had placed his faith, had made his God, would be the ones to collect on their agreement. And though Ahaz would not ask for a sign, he would be given one nonetheless. A virgin will give birth to a child who will still be young when the downfall of Syria, Israel, and Judah come to pass. A child, the symbol of powerlessness, juxtaposed against the power of the nations. This isn't some prophecy for the distant future. It's the real-time consequence of Ahaz's disloyalty to God. Emmanuel means God is with us. And with our Christian eyes on, we relate this positively to Matthew's use of this prophecy to talk about Jesus. But in the context of this passage, we recognize that God is with us is a double-edged sword. John Oswalt comments, "To the extent that we are dependent upon Him, His presence results in blessing. But to the extent that we refuse to depend upon Him, His presence is an embarrassment and a curse. Ahaz and Judah would soon face the consequences of their short-sighted choice to abandon their God, as their country was decimated and their people taken into captivity in Assyria. But that could not alter God's ultimate plan. Assyria was but a tool in His hand, and out of the destruction which she would precipitate would emerge a larger opportunity for God to demonstrate Himself trustworthy, the restoration from captivity. Out of the wreckage caused by Ahaz's distrust of God, He would still restore Judah and would raise up a true son of David to lead His people, the Messiah. God is with us. Like Ahaz, we can allow our fear and our desire to manufacture security lead us away from faith and trust in God, the only real source of security. Ahaz thought he could be clever enough, do enough political maneuvering, enough deal-making to keep himself safe. But all he did was make it worse for himself and his people. No amount of work, no amount of cleverness, no political system, no nation, no other God can ever bring us the security we desire. Only by trusting in God, the one who created us, the one who is sovereign over the whole world, whose wisdom and power are limitless, only by trusting in Him can we find the peace we seek. And anything we trust in place of God will eventually be the very thing that turns on us and destroys us. God is with us. Assyria is not.